Hey everyone, thank you for attending another session of the Just Us Weekly webinar series. And we have my friend Melody.
Ah,
So excited you're here. This is one of my favorite topics because even when people know they need to do estate planning, they don't know how to have the conversation. So,
yes, and not just having the conversation, but exactly what to have the conversation about, I think can
yes.
sometimes be important.
Yes.
Um,
So I am really excited about this one. And for those of you that don't know me, don't know Melody, let me tell you a little bit about us. So, my name is Tabitha Justice. I am the founder of Just Us Retirement Solutions. We are what's considered a collaborative and educational focused full retirement company. And what that means is we are very aware we don't know everything. And so we try to really focus on what we specialize in. And then we collaborate with dozens of other businesses that are professionals at what they do. Melody and Caring Transitions being one of them. And so we work together as partnerships, collaborators, and we are also very education focused. So we believe it's really important to prepare in advance for things that you need to learn and not just rely upon someone else who tell you what to do, but actually understand how to do it yourself. And we are doing this in collaboration with Bringing Back the Village. Bringing Back the Village is a collection, umbrella organization of profit, nonprofit, government, private businesses. And we are very aware that it can be confusing and full of complexity as you age and go through systems. And so our goal is to eliminate as much of that as possible through collaborations and educations. And Melody and I are both members of Bringing Back the Village.
mhm.
And then, Melody, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I will. So, again, I am thrilled to be part of Bringing Back the Village. This is something and you'll notice as we kind of go through this webinar today, I get passionate about it because I see it every day. So, my name's Melody Bailey, and I own Caring Transitions of Kanawha Valley. We are a move management, relocation, downsizing, decluttering, liquidation, kind of everything that deals with the stuff in people's homes as they transition company.
Yeah.
We're Caring Transitions is a franchise, but we are the first and only location here in West Virginia. So we stay pretty busy because this is a state that really kind of needs our assistance. We help with anything from packing boxes, coordinating moves, emptying out houses, doing estate sales. And so we deal with a lot of this stuff. And I do love being part of Bringing Back the Village just because the way that I see it, I have a little bit of information and a little bit of knowledge, and I would like to share that little bit of information and knowledge with anybody that I can. I can not necessarily reach all of my community, but if I can reach a few people in my community, they can reach out to their circle and their circle,
Yeah.
and hopefully we can get some of this information spread out, to everybody because I think it's something everybody can learn from, whether you're helping yourself or whether you're helping your neighbor, your friends, your family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think pretty much Bringing Back the Village, everyone that's involved kind of has the same mindset that, what little bit of knowledge we have in our area of expertise, let's share it, let's get it out there so that we can all kind of make a better, healthier, stronger community.
Yes.
So I'm very passionate about this. And because of the field that I work in, I do feel that, this softer side of estate planning is something that I see after it's happened,
Mhm.
right? A lot of times we see it with clients whose family members have passed on, whose family
Mhm.
members have gone into medical situations where they can no longer make decisions for themselves. And so we see it a lot where people are kind of dealing with the stuff that's left in a home.
Mhm.
And I'm here to kind of talk about that. It's not uncommon, and Bringing Back the Village has other webinars and sessions and speakers. Tabitha has lots of resources for people that talk about estate planning, right? Things like cars and houses and deeds and things that are titled, things assets, in other words. But I'm here to talk about the softer side, right?
Yeah. Which
So
is just as important.
absolutely.
Exactly just as important.
In my book, I would say it's at least as important. Just because it's not something that ends up on a certificate or a title and it's not registered somewhere, doesn't mean that your things aren't important. They really
Right.
are. So it's important to have these conversations.
Yeah, I'm excited to go over this. And just as a reminder for everyone that's watching, we have two purposes with each of these webinars that we do. Obviously, we want everyone to educate themselves so that they can prepare properly for their own life, their own family. However, community means everything to us. We're big proponents of community. And so spread it. What you take today, little bits of information, just have a conversation with someone in your life about it. You never know how you talking to someone else about something can completely change the trajectory of their life,
Absolutely.
positively. So share what you learned today, because together we can create healthier, stronger, kinder communities, and that is our goal.
Wonderful.
So, Melody, we're going to get started.
Okay, so
What happens?
we will jump right into this. There's
Yeah.
a lot of information. Again, this is something I get a little bit passionate about because
Okay.
I see it and I see the effects that it has on individuals and families. And I would like for people to at least start getting the ball rolling in their head. That doesn't mean that you have to start making every single decision and decide everything right away. But hopefully at the end of this webinar, you will have, retained some information that at least gets the gears turning in your head that says, okay, I have some steps that I can take, some things that I can do to at least start making decisions and start getting the process rolling. The last thing that I want to see in people's lives is they wait until the last minute or they don't plan at all. There's a lot of negative repercussions that can happen because of that. And so we want to avoid what negative repercussions, right? Everyone has goals and dreams for what they want to happen. And after we've passed on, we can no longer make those goals and dreams happen other than through the decisions that we've made beforehand, right? So let's talk a little bit about the softer side of estate planning, shall we?
Okay.
So we're not necessarily talking about cars, houses, assets, bank accounts, that sort of thing. We're talking about the more sentimental stuff. I am not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV, and I did not stay in the Holiday Inn last night. So don't take this as legal advice, but I will tell you what happens to my belongings after I pass away. We're going to talk about this whole webinar will kind of come from two different perspectives. One, what if you're the person who has belongings and you're trying to figure out what's going to happen to them after you're gone? But two, what if you're a person who knows someone who has not planned for what will happen to their belongings? How can we have that conversation with them? What should they be thinking about, right? So in the state of West Virginia, if you pass away and you do not have a will, let's back up. If you pass away and you do not have a valid will, the state law in West Virginia has a very specific order in which items will be passed down to your family, spouses, children, yada, da, da, da. The point that I want to make here is that if you do not have a will when you pass away, the state will make the decisions about what happens to your belongings. In most cases, that means that if you have a family member that's close to you, that family member will inherit your belongings. So we're talking about your actual stuff, right? I don't know that most people want the state to make that decision, right? And in that case, the state may assign an executor to your estate. That executor will be making your decisions. Even if you have a will and you write in that will who is to be the executor and who is to be making those decisions on your behalf after you're gone, it is up to the executor to interpret the terminology that's in your will to meet your goals, to make that happen. What I see happen a lot of times is that wills are written incompletely or vaguely to where they do not necessarily give enough information about what should happen. If you'll flip to the next slide, I will show you an example of this happening. So in this photo, we see none other than the illustrious Audrey Hepburn, correct?
Yes, I remember this.
Right. So here's the situation with Audrey Hepburn. Audrey Hepburn passed away in 1993. It was 2015, so we're talking more than 10 years later. Her two sons had to go to a judge and ask the judge to decide of her items who got what. And this is because Audrey Hepburn's will was written vaguely. Her will just said the items, she had a storage unit that was filled with clothing and jewelry and scripts and posters, lots of movie paraphernalia. She had a storage unit and her will said that it was to be split 50-50 between her two sons. And that's all it said. and the two sons could not agree on what 50-50 means. And so more than 10 years later, they were at a judge trying to get that judge, and that judge had to literally decide who gets what. I do not want to, I, in my mind, taking my siblings to court to try to decide something like that is a nightmare.
And it happens a lot. We
It
see it all the time on our
all the
ends.
time. This is Audrey Hepburn, right? She had a will. It was a long will. It was fairly detailed in a lot of ways. She had lots of resources to be able to, afford the legal help to write a very detailed document.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there were just details that were left out of it. And if that can happen to Audrey Hepburn and her family, it can happen to anybody. I see it all the time. I don't know if you've seen it, Tabitha, but families can be torn apart by this sort of thing. Right.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily the money. Sometimes it's the money, but sometimes it's the little sentimental things, or the family photo albums, or just lots of stuff like that can tear a family apart. I don't want to see that happen to anybody. And even more importantly, I want people to be able to take charge and take control of their own items, of their own belongings, and for you to be able to decide what happens to your belongings, not for someone else to make that decision for you after you're gone. Right.
Right.
So that's my horror story, is to say, look, if it can happen to Audrey Hepburn and her family, it can happen to anybody. It pays to be prepared. Right.
Yes.
So on that note, why do we make a plan? We are going to make a plan primarily, and if you take nothing away from this webinar other than the fact that you need to write a will, that is thorough and that is clear. Please write a will. Maybe you're making your plan and your sole reason for making this plan is so that you can write that will. That's good. That is okay. And if that's all you get from this, that's positive. That's a good positive thing. But there are a lot of other reasons to plan. One is to maintain your family harmony. Again, we see it happen a lot. After somebody's passed away, family members are bickering and fighting over items. It tears a family apart. We don't want to see that happen after someone's gone, but we don't want to see that happen now either. And studies have shown that families are a lot more likely to accept the results, accept the outcome while someone is still alive and has made those decisions while they're still alive, rather than after they're gone and someone else is making those decisions. Making a plan on what's going to happen to your items can give you a lot of peace of mind now. It can help you to meet your goals in the future. So there are some people who, maybe one of their priorities in life is that they are very interested in history and genealogy and their past and their future. And so being able to make these decisions beforehand can get your belongings in the right hands so that those goals can continue to be met after you're gone.
I know something that I have seen a few times is like someone has a really in-depth hobby, like you were just saying, like they have huge collections that mean a lot to them. And then when they pass away, they don't specify that it goes to who they want it to go to. And then, the other person just doesn't care for it, doesn't want it, just trashes it. It doesn't mean anything to them.
It does. It happens a lot. And in the field that I'm in, of course, we do our very best to try to reach out to people that those things are going to be meaningful. But we're not always involved in a situation like that, and professionals aren't always involved.
Right.
It is a shame to think that someone has invested a lot of time, money, and effort into a hobby, into a collection that pretty much is dissolved and disappears after they're gone. When it could be of such service to someone else. It can be such a benefit and a blessing to somebody else to have, whether it's for their own collection or for his history's sake, for posterity's sake. So I see it happen a lot. We don't want that to happen. We want things to get into the right hands.
Right.
Part of the reason why we make a plan, and I do get a little up on this soapbox sometimes too, is because it's important to talk about what we have, why we have it, and why it's important. Right. There are belongings that I have that, and again, this is me kind of telling on myself, but there are things that I have that are important to me and maybe important in general that other people probably don't realize that I have or why they're important, right? And part of what's important about this is having those conversations while you can, while you can still have these conversations. After you're gone, you cannot tell anybody why these things are important. Heaven forbid that, a medical emergency happens and you're in a medical state where you can't have those conversations anymore. We don't want that to happen.
Mhm.
Information is lost. That's how information is lost.
Mhm.
Right. Communicate while you can. And also just making this plan now can reduce the stress of having that difficult conversation. Because by
Mhm.
making the plan and having it arranged and organized, maybe that's on paper or just in your mind, means that when you approach somebody to talk about what's going to happen, you have it very clearly lined out and you've reasoned it out, right? You have your reasonings and your motivations for what you're doing. So having that conversation becomes a lot easier, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So if you'll flip to the next slide a little bit, I want to talk about people don't want to talk about this sort of thing,
They
right?
don't. They're so afraid of this.
Absolutely. People do not want to talk about this. And a lot of times the reason that they don't want to talk about this is, well, I don't want to talk about what's going to happen when I'm dead. I mean, like
Mhm.
that's a dirty word. It's not a dirty word. Death happens. It is a natural part of life is death, right?
Mhm.
It's going to happen to pretty much everybody.
Mhm.
Um, and it does not have to be disrespectful or uncomfortable to talk about that sort of thing. Death is inevitable. And being able to talk about this brings a sense of control back to that situation, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So if you think, well, this is not something that, I'm ever going to talk about because it makes me feel bad. Well, when you talk about it, it brings it out into the open and you actually feel a lot better talking about it.
Yes.
There are people who don't want to talk about this because, kind of there's two sides of the coins, but I hear a lot of families say, we don't want to talk about this because it's not going to be a problem in our family. We all get along. We love each other and nobody is going to have any hard feelings about any of this. So my way to overcome that objection about having that conversation is if your family's already getting along and not going to argue, there should be no problem having this conversation, right? It
Yeah,
can be
and
so sweet.
I'm gonna be the devil's advocate
Sure,
here. There's
absolutely.
always one family member who feels like they're doing more than everyone else and gets resentful, in
Exactly.
my opinion.
And I won't say always, but let's say 98% of the time. Absolutely. There is a family member who it may look to you like everything's going well and everything's going great and everyone's getting along. That doesn't mean everyone agrees, right? There may be somebody out there who does not feel like everything's going great and everything's, upsetting. They want to have that conversation. You won't know about that until you have that conversation. If
Mhm.
it's not going to be a problem, then it's not going to be a problem. Have the conversation and just know, and then you've got the peace of mind, and so does everyone else, of
Mhm.
knowing we've talked about this and all the information's out in the open. You
Yes.
know, there are also families on the flip side where no one ever agrees about anything ever, right?
Mhm.
They're always bickering, they're always fighting. And so people will say, I don't want to have this conversation because they're going to bicker and fight, and it's just going to make things really ugly and uncomfortable right now.
Mhm.
But I will warn you that waiting until you've passed on or you're in a position where you can't make those decisions, that does not make that bickering and fighting go away.
Mhm.
Right?
No,
Having a
100%.
Absolutely, it doesn't. Having that conversation now at least gives an opportunity for you to say your piece. If these are your belongings, it is your responsibility and it is your right to be able to decide what happens to them, right?
Mhm.
It is your right to be able to have your say and decide what happens to them.
Mhm.
Say it now while you can, because you will not be able to have that opportunity forever and ever, right?
Yes.
People will say they don't want to have this conversation because they don't have anything. They don't have anything that's worth money. It's all, we're not from wealth, so we don't really need to talk about who gets what. The truth is, just because it's not monetarily valuable does not mean
Mhm.
that it's of no value whatsoever. Like you said, there are collections and hobbies. We all have sentimental, historical things. There are stories that are attached to these items that are of money, but it is of value. And the one that this is my personal excuse for pretty much any conversation or any project that I don't want to do is I'm already dealing with too much. My plate is already too full. I cannot deal with this.
Mhm.
The truth is, there's never going to be a good time to have this conversation. There's never going to be a good time to deal with this. I
Mhm.
always laugh and joke and say nobody wakes up on a Monday morning when they have the week off from work and says, you know what, this is going to be the week that I decide who's going to get what after I'm gone. There's no one ever says that. There's never a good time. But you need to make time for things that are important, even if they're
Mhm.
uncomfortable, right?
Yes.
So that's why we're doing this. That's why we're having this webinar, is just to, get you started and say,
Mhm.
it's time to come up with a plan. You don't have to do it all at once. And it's actually a lot easier to start way earlier than you think you need to. It's way easier to get started than to wait until the last minute and try to figure everything out and make mistakes and make rash decisions and, do a lot of things that are not in your best interest.
Yeah, and I think too, like, there's so much anxiety built up over it that once you get started, you realize it's not that hard after all.
It's not simple by any stretch, but it is not something that you have to be afraid of going into. I mean, it's doable.
Mhm.
You've heard the adage that how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Mhm.
It's a big task, but it's not something that you can't overcome. It's absolutely doable, but you can't do it all at once. You can't do it all in a weekend. And personally, I would say you shouldn't wait until you're knocking on death's door before you start making these decisions, right?
Yes.
Do it while you still can.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So tips on it, because a lot of people, they are so full of anxiety over this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And reasonably so, I think, to some extent, because there are a lot of emotions that go into this on both sides of things. I mean, people have fears of what's going to happen. People have strong opinions on what they want to see happen. Um, Motivations and priorities and people's personalities just clash.
Mhm.
So I think when you're going into this conversation, and depending on kind of which perspective you're coming from, whether
Mhm.
you're talking about your own things and what's going to happen to them, or whether you're talking to someone else about their future and what's going to happen to their belongings when they're gone, you really need to know why you're bringing up the issue. And we've already talked about some of those kind of important reasons why we should come up with a plan. But
Mhm.
it's important to go into that conversation knowing exactly what your role is, right?
Mhm.
So you want to step up to that role, but you don't want to overstep your role either. So if you're talking to maybe your parents or your aunts and uncles, your neighbors about, have you considered what's going to happen to all of this when you're gone? It's not your role or responsibility to make that decision for them.
Mhm.
Maybe you're coming into this and your role and responsibility is just to get them to start planning and start thinking, right?
Mhm.
It Again, if you're coming into this and it is your belongings that you're talking about, your role and responsibility is to make those decisions, but you don't want to back down and let someone else make them for you. Okay. Unless that's intentional, but we'll get to that. But you kind of need to know what you're going into this situation, what you're going into the conversation, what your goal is, what you want to happen, and
Mhm.
think about the other person's perspective as well, right? So don't go into a situation where someone's already emotional, struggling, and say, I see that you're having a hard time with the passing of your husband, but we need to dive right into this and make this happen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
steamroll over their emotions. That is not fair to someone. You have to consider their emotions, consider their concerns, listen more than you talk.
Mhm.
This is probably good for just every conversation that we go into. But I always say God gave us two ears and one mouth. So
Mhm.
we probably need to listen twice as much as we talk, and
Mhm.
talk from your own perspective and not from their perspective. Don't put words into somebody else's mouth and what they should be thinking and what they should be doing. You come into this with your own motivations, but keep it to yourself, if that makes sense. So that
Yeah,
just
no,
kind of
I
helps you
do.
start that conversation.
All right.
So now we're going to dive into kind of the meat of the issue. That kind of sets the background for
Mhm.
that we should have going into this, right? I think what happens when we think about going into this process of, oh my gosh, I have a whole house full of everything, and maybe a storage unit full of everything, and an attic, and
Mhm.
I don't even know what to do. And so we go into this and we think, how am I going to do it? It's really important to slow down, back up
Mhm.
just a little bit. What happens is you get into a situation where you're looking at some things and you think, I don't know what to do with this. I'm just going to start making decisions rashly. And you get to the end of it and you say, what have I done? I don't even understand why I made the decisions I made, what decisions I'm making. It's really important to kind of get a baseline of yourself first.
Okay.
You cannot make decisions about what's going to happen to these things unless you have a baseline for yourself. I do have some worksheets that go along with some of these pages. So if anybody's out there watching this webinar and you're interested in having those worksheets, please reach out to Tabitha, reach out to me, Caring Transitions
Mhm.
in Kanawha Valley. I'm happy to provide them. It can kind of step you through and help you see, help you work through this on paper, if that helps.
Yeah,
But
and there's also, for those of you that are watching right now, there's a chat feature. You can also put your information in the chat feature, and then we will respond to it later if you would like to request information.
absolutely, yeah. So I want to interact if possible and if necessary. So whatever I can do to get that information to you and kind of help you with your situation.
Mhm.
So as you're going into this whole process, you kind of want to start with, what are my priorities? What are the things that are important to me as I'm making these decisions? The reason
Mhm.
we do this is because you kind of get stuck up in the moment and you get stuck in the weeds a little bit. And sometimes you have to step back and say, okay, I need to think of why I'm doing this, and let that guide me into making the decision that's right for my situation. People have different priorities. The thing is, none of these are right, none of these are wrong. Your
Mhm.
priorities are your priorities. And I say that really just to be empowering to you, because as you're making your decisions, this is your stuff that you're talking about. What's
Mhm.
important to you is important to you. And I'm not here to judge and say that's good or bad. There are people in my life and people I've come in contact with that privacy is of utmost importance to them. So those are the sort of people that I would never come into their situation and say, well, let's have an estate sale of your things after you're gone, so that we can bring all of the world to come into your home and search through your closets and
Right.
see everything. There are some people who are incredibly private, and that would be a devastating idea to them. On the other hand, there are people completely the opposite that say, my life is an open book. I want everyone to, I have nothing to hide. I want everyone to see it. People come from different perspectives, right? Neither of those is right, neither of them's wrong. But you need to understand, is my priority leaning more towards, am I a private person that does not want to have excess people involved? Or am
Mhm.
I a more public person that has no problem with that?
I've
Um,
never really considered that before.
Absolutely. And some people, like this Audrey Hepburn situation with the sons, the idea of having a judge step into kind of your private life and your private
Mhm.
moments, your private belongings, and making those decisions, and all of a sudden making that a very public issue, that would be really devastating for some people. I
Yeah.
can understand that completely.
Yeah.
So you need to know going into this, like, who do I want to be involved in this situation? And
Mhm.
to what extent can I control that, right?
Mhm.
Family relationships. So I know you, Tabitha, and me both, we have pretty strong ties with our parents and with our siblings. And, we have close family relationships, but that's not true for everybody.
Right.
And that's not bad or wrong either. Some
Mhm.
people do not have great relationships with their family, or have no desire to keep that relationship with their family members. And so
Mhm.
it may not be a priority to them what their family members want to see happen, right? They'd much rather make their own decisions and consider the needs of someone else that's not their family, for example.
Mhm.
Um, we will talk a little bit about fairness. A lot of people, most people, I would say, going into this situation say, I just want to do what's fair.
Mhm.
The problem is that fairness is kind of defined differently for everybody, and we will talk about that because that
Okay.
opens a whole other can of worms. Um, Preserving memories. So you talked about, people with collections and memorabilia and that sort of thing. Is it important to you that these collections stay intact? Is it important to you that they get to the right place?
Mhm.
Maybe some people want to contribute to society or to organizations, that sort of thing. Some people it's monetary, whether that's, for whatever motivation or whatever reason that is, but maybe it's more important to them that, the items are not so important, but the value of the items be maintained.
Yes.
That is something to consider, absolutely. And it
Mhm.
may be for the well-being of your family, or maybe for the well-being of an organization. There's a lot of different reasons, but
Mhm.
sometimes money is the priority. That's not a bad thing either.
Nope.
It's really just somebody's priority. I hate to say it, money makes the world go round. Money can make a lot of decisions. And so, the idea that our items are worth money is not a dirty or bad idea. Okay.
Mhm.
So we talked a little bit about this idea of fairness, right?
Mhm.
The problem is fair doesn't mean the same thing to everyone.
True.
I'm going to flip to the next slide really quickly, and then we'll probably come back to this one. So here is this kind of a diagram that talks about equality, we'll say.
Yes.
And so there are people who you'll see on the left side of the screen, there are people trying to reach the apples on the tree, and everyone's got a boost, right? Everyone's got a step to step up on. And because
Mhm.
of that step to step up on, some of them are able to reach, some are not able to reach. And a lot of people, they will see that side and say, absolutely, that is completely fair. We have provided the same assistance for everyone. We have given everyone equal, and that is fair. That is 100% correct. On the flip side, the right side of the screen is also 100% correct.
Mhm.
And this idea, some people are given more than others,
Mhm.
and then they have equal access
Mhm.
to the items, to the apples on the tree, for example. There's nothing wrong with this side of the screen either. Okay.
Right.
But this is the issue that we get into when everyone says they just want to be fair. What's your idea of fair really look like?
Mhm.
Okay. Neither of these is right, neither of these is wrong. But it
Mhm.
really helps when you go into a situation and you're deciding who is going to get what. What does fairness mean to you? And how can you make these decisions based on what fairness means to you if you don't know what fairness means, right? So let's look back to the slide before and we'll kind of talk a little bit about fairness.
Okay.
So does this concept kind of make some sense, Tabitha?
Oh, it makes complete sense to me, because I'm going to throw in from my perspective a little
Mhm.
bit too. Like something I see a lot is maybe one child stayed at home and took care of everything, and one child went out and like lived in different states and did different
Yeah.
things. And so you have to have a discussion like what's fair to distribute to
Mhm.
our children who the parents want to make both of them feel loved, and but there's different ideas of what's fair there.
There's different ideas of what fairness is,
Yeah.
exactly. And so the worksheet that I have that we typically work from asks a lot of questions about that. And not just necessarily from a fairness standpoint of, well, it asks about fairness from lots of different perspectives, right?
Hmm.
So to some people, fairness may mean that every family member, maybe all of my children are going to be treated the same, no
Hmm.
matter what they've contributed to the family over the years. So, one of my children was a caretaker for their father for many, many years. One went out and worked outside the home and didn't have the opportunity to care for their father. But to me, fairness is everyone gets the same thing. Um, we think about, I think it's worth thinking about differences in needs. We have families where maybe some children have developmental disabilities or physical disabilities that put them into maybe a more financial needy spot than others.
Hmm.
Do we look at that and consider one of my children needs more assistance than the other and needs more? Or is that not of importance to me? Again, I'm going to probably preach this too much, but none of these answers are wrong. Okay.
Right.
It's really and truly what matters to you is what is fairness to you.
Hmm.
Some people will go into their family and say that birth order is absolutely of importance. My oldest child should get the priority and get to pick and choose, get to have first pick of what they want.
Hmm.
To some people, maybe that's not, and they say, nope, we want the baby to go first. What about if they're married or not married? Do we look at our daughters and sons-in-law on equal footing as our own children, as our biological children, I'll say, or maybe those are considered a little bit differently. Um, Suppose we're talking about items in a home and we say we want it to be fair. Does that mean everyone gets an equal number of items? Or does that mean everyone gets an equal value of items?
Hmm.
There's lots of different definitions of fairness. The thought is you just need to know what this looks like before you get into the process of decision making.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's kind of like playing a game and making up the rules as you go.
Hmm.
That can be a little difficult, and that can lead to a lot of hurt feelings, and that can lead to a lot of misunderstandings. This is setting the rules before the game starts, right?
Hmm.
Um, I will throw out there that there are actually, I recently just discovered that there's at least one organization out there. I won't share their name because I've no experience with them other than knowing that they exist and a little bit of how they operate. But there are actually organizations out there that you can pay to help provide this service of helping you determine who gets what,
Wow.
right? Yeah. And it's fairly affordable. I mean, I guess depending on your definition of affordable,
Yeah.
but the point of me saying that is one, there's help out there to help you do this, but two,
Hmm.
this is not simple, right?
Hmm.
If there are people out there that can build entire businesses on helping make this happen, that's because it's not something that you really should just dive into without a plan, right?
Right.
So think about And you mentioned, there are kids who have helped care for me over the years, and there are kids who have not been in a position to help care for me over the years for my health needs. Um,
Mhm.
are there individuals and organizations outside of my family that I feel need to be rewarded for what they've done for me or my care for them?
Mhm.
What kind of financial needs do they have? Do I have grandchildren? Does that play into this role of what is fair? Um, do my children that have children, where does the decision making stop and start? What children and what grandchildren are going to be involved in this decision? Does it matter birth order? Going back through my list here, distance can also matter. If you have
Mhm.
family members that live in California versus family members that live right here in the Kanawha Valley with you, you may not want the family member in California to get your china cabinet because that's not particularly useful to get it across the country to them.
Right.
There's a lot of different things that you kind of think about. As you think about these things, you'll start to come up with a definition in your mind of what fairness is to you. And again, that's
Mhm.
one of those things you need to kind of come back to whenever you have questions about, I'm making a decision about the clothes in my closet, or I'm making decisions about the china in my china cabinet or my antique car collection. Whatever it is, you come back to these, basic principles of what's fairness to you and what your priorities are, and that can help you make those decisions a little bit more clearly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really important thing that people don't always consider.
Yeah. And so that's the thing is, and the next step that we'll get into is actually more of the meat of the process, which is, identifying those items. But
Mhm.
I think it's really important to slow ourselves down before we get to that point and say, okay, let's slow down and talk about what's our priorities and what does fairness look like to me before we get into that, so that we can kind of have a baseline. We can
Yeah.
kind of have a reference point to come back to. I will say that this is, again, this identifying keepsakes. This step of the process to me is super important. I love the idea that, you know, we all have belongings that are important to us that no one understands but us,
Yeah.
right? Um, I have family members who I can enter their home, and I can remember from my childhood things that
Mhm.
are in their home that they probably have no idea have meaning to me.
Mhm.
And I think it's really important from that perspective, as you're looking into someone else's life and looking into their belongings. I think it's really important to have those conversations about, you don't realize it, but these things are important to me, or I know that they would be important to your granddaughter, even if you don't understand that. Um,
Mhm.
and so I would say make a list, really and truly, whether it's your own belongings or someone else's belongings. And this is where it gets kind of tedious, right? This is the hard part. This is the hard part is, okay, I'm going to make a list of everything. And maybe you don't go down so far as to say red sweater, blue sweater, green sweater, but maybe you say sweaters or clothing. I mean, it's important. Um, and I talked about making a will. This is the sort of thing that can be added as an addendum to a will.
Mhm.
Have a list of items. I think it's really important to start listing them out. And not that you have to start making decisions right away about who gets the green sweater and who gets the red sweater, but
Mhm.
what these sweaters are and are they important to me and why?
Mhm.
Put it in writing and have those conversations with people. So have conversations with your children. Um, one thing that's really important to do is have conversations with the executor of your estate. So if you plan to assign someone to be the executor of your will, have
Mhm.
this conversation with them, because they will be that person that's left to interpret the will and that's left to designate who gets what item and to make sure that
Mhm.
this person happens. Talk to them about what's important. But if you're talking to your family members, your parents, your aunts, your uncles, talk to them about what is important to you too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I, I've gone to my aunt and said, you may not believe it, but this purse that you carry to church every week for so many Sundays, that's important to me and has memories, right? You don't realize it because you've thrown it in the back of a closet and it's not important to you at all anymore. But to me, that's very important. We
I
have,
have a relative that it's just her thing. Um every family member that has passed away, she takes their Tupperware. And I thought that was such an odd thing, but now that we've gone through so many different family transitions, um, she brings Grandma Clark's Tupperware with the cake in it.
I
And
love it.
yeah, and it increases like the family memories because you're like, oh, do you remember when Grandpa would say this about this
Mhm.
Tupperware? And yes,
Or, the Thanksgiving that somebody spilled the mashed potatoes,
yeah,
the lid fell off, and those fun little memories and stories about that stuff. And
yeah,
again, and that just reiterates the point that it's not the valuable stuff.
right.
I mean, Tupperware is not exactly, something you can cash in and build your retirement on. It's not valuable in that sense, but the memories that are attached to it are absolutely valuable. I
Hmm.
love that story. I think that is so sweet. And those family members wouldn't have thought about that, right? They're not thinking, who's going to get my Tupperware? But it might be important to think, Aunt Cindy wants wants the Tupperware. She really does. And unless Aunt Cindy expresses that, nobody's going to know.
Hmm.
So again, that's why I think it's so important to have these conversations. I will make the caveat that sometimes you don't want to have these conversations, and that's okay too,
Hmm.
as long as you are intentional about that.
Hmm.
So, and I'll read a couple of kind of examples through here. But think about the things in your house that are not necessarily your cars and your house and your bank accounts. And I've got a
Hmm.
list here, furniture and your kitchen items. But think about things like your pet. Who's going to get little bunny foo foo once you're gone? It's important to make that decision. You may have art, you may have handwritten letters that have been passed through the generations, or handwritten letters from your own childhood, um, photos, documents, musical instruments, all of that stuff. These things are going to be important to somebody.
Hmm.
On the flip side of that coin, and because nothing is ever simple, and I like to be my own devil's advocate sometimes, not everything is important. And
Hmm.
I think it's important to consider that tastes change,
Hmm.
styles have changed, people's ways of living have changed,
Hmm.
and it's really important not to get beat up and not beat yourself up if someone is not interested in some of your items. Okay, today's generations, we don't do fancy china sets. um, the generations before us, you get married and you get a set of china, and that was really important and it was a milestone. Today's generations, we don't do that. And so
Hmm.
it's really important not to get too caught up in that and say, nobody wants your china. Maybe that doesn't mean that they don't love you as a person,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean that they want to take your china, because it could also be a burden to somebody, right?
Absolutely.
So don't sit here and think my kids are going to want everything that I have. You really have to be realistic and say my kids have a life of their own. They have their own styles, their own tastes. They already have a lot of what they need, and they may just not want what you have. You got a good life out of it. You bought it for what it was. You used it. You loved it, and that's why you have it. So if somebody doesn't want it, don't get yourself, don't let your feelings get hurt over something like that.
Yeah, there's that meme to where like the guy opens up the door of the garage and he's like, "This is all yours," and the kids are like, "I don't want
Uh,
it."
yeah, because at that point it becomes a burden to the kids.
Yeah,
To have the storage unit that's full of boxes that haven't been opened for 20 years, that can be a burden.
I am maybe guilty of that right now. Yeah.
I maybe see it a lot. Um, it, it's a burden. I like my stuff too, though. So I will tell you that. I'm going to flip down a couple of slides to
Okay.
one of the examples. And I'll read this one to you, and we can kind of talk about, the thoughts that went into this and into the process of her decision making. When Emma invited her 4 children to spend a day with her and requested that none of her grandchildren or spouses come, her children wondered what was up. At the time, their 85-year-old mother was planning to move from her home of 40 years to a nursing home. So the children gathered and they spent the day going through Emma's property with her. Emma took an item, they talked about where it came from, and then the family talked about their memories related to each item. Next, they decided who should have each item. And 9 months later, when Emma passed, the children couldn't help but appreciate that special day that they had had with their mother before she died. It had been a wonderful celebration of her life.
Yeah.
So this is a really good example of, Emma made the decision that she wanted her children to be involved in the decision making.
Hmm.
I would say that this is probably an anomaly in the sense that they spent one day going through her things. I don't think that that's realistic, but she was very intentional that she wanted her children and only her children. She didn't want her grandchildren. She didn't want her sons and daughters-in-law. And they really took time to go through the items and share the memories and talk about it. She wanted those children to be involved in that decision-making process. She also made her wishes known before she passed so that they have a chance to talk about all of that. But if you'll flip down to the next example, it's very different. Neither one's right and neither one is wrong. Okay. So example 2, when my grandfather died in late spring, he left a list of what items should go to whom in the family. Rather than disposing of these items immediately after the funeral, our family chose to reconvene at Thanksgiving for what we called the Great Giveaway. After a wonderful turkey dinner, Grandpa's list was read and each person received the items designated for him or her. As they did so, each took time to share their memories and fun times and special moments they had shared with Grandpa. So this is
emotional,
and it's very sweet. And I think what makes it sweet is that both grandfather and Emma were very intentional about what they were doing, and they also shared the memories. In one way or another, they shared the memories that were attached to these items, right?
Yes.
So grandfather did completely differently than Emma. He did not involve the entire family in making these decisions. He didn't consult his children. He didn't consult his grandkids. He made these decisions on his own. To him, that was important to him, right? He did not want to have other people involved in the decision making. And again, that's okay.
Yep.
It's just that he was intentional and made a plan. He shared the list, and at this point, the list wasn't shared until after he was gone. So Emma's kids knew exactly what was going to happen beforehand. His family didn't know until afterwards. But again, neither of these is wrong. It's just that they were intentional about what they were doing, right? 2 very different ways of doing it, neither of them wrong.
Yep.
Right. So I will talk about, so I think that just goes to point out that there's no perfect way to do this. There's no one way to do this. There's no one right way to do this. I do think it's important to kind of figure out beforehand who you want to be involved in your decision-making process. Sometimes that's your spouse. Sometimes that's a friend. Sometimes that's your family. Sometimes it's nobody. There are even, you can always get an external party to come in and help you with this sort of thing, to make these decisions. But keep your goals in mind as you do it. If you're a private person, if you are a public person, if you have certain monetary goals that you want, if you have certain people that you do and don't want to be involved in this process, make those decisions based on those priorities, right? I'm going to flip down to some possibilities and we'll talk about how this can happen. Okay. And I'm going to bring up that company that I've found that does this kind of as a business. And they take a lot of these possibilities and blend them together. They do have free resources available so that you can do some of the steps on your own. They only get involved to the extent that you want them to be involved. But I think there's no one perfect way to do this.
Right.
The whole idea is that if you make it a conscious decision while you still can and express that to your family, you can explain to them why you're doing what you're doing. If they have any objections, you can get them out in the air and talk about them now. Otherwise, when you're gone, there's just so many unanswered questions that can't be resolved. So I will say this is one that my family has always done, is labeling items. I don't know if you've ever had experience with this.
My family does not label. So
okay. So in my family, this is that has always happened. And now as an adult, I see that maybe it wasn't the wisest choice. It's not the worst, but people will say, oh, here's this old music box and you want to have that after I'm gone. Well, just stick a label on the back or a Post-it note on the back and write your name on it. And then when I'm gone, you take what has your name on it. And I guess in some situations, some families would say that's really odd and weird. My family, we've been very open about that sort of thing. And that's what always happened, right? The problem is, and this is might sound silly, but labels don't last forever. Masking tape doesn't stick forever. Pen is going to smudge. Your marker is going to smudge. And anybody can peel that label right off anytime they want to, right? The other part of this is labeling an item is not a legally valid way. So if there's going to be dissension in your family about who
Mhm.
gets what items, this is not legally binding. Okay.
Mhm.
So keep that in mind. For some families, this may work perfectly. For my family, it's always worked rather well. But looking back, may not have been our wisest. May not be our smartest thing that we've ever done.
Got
Um,
it.
it's something that you can do. Some families, and I have seen this happen, is they do what is like a private auction of items after someone's gone.
Mhm.
This means that the family member that has passed did not designate any specific thing to go to any specific person.
Okay.
And a lot of times they use quote unquote funny money. So it's not real dollars. It could be
Mhm.
real dollars, but generally it's not real dollars. And the family gets together and they essentially use these fake dollars that they have to buy items in the home. And that allows them to use the emotional value of
Mhm.
things as kind of their bargaining chip of I would rather have this because it's much more emotional, of much more sentimental and emotional value to me than that, even though that's a more monetary value, right? And I have
Right.
this happen a lot of times. Sometimes people don't want their family to fight over anything at all, and they will explicitly outline in their will that they want everything, all of their belongings to be sold, whether
Mhm.
that's at public auction, estate sale, something like that. It happens more often than you'd think. And they just want the assets to be divided among the
Mhm.
family. That is a perfectly reasonable way to go about things. Um,
Mhm.
Again, there are pros and cons to all of these methods. In that sort of scenario, the sentimental value of things is completely discarded. So if there are sentimental things to the family, they don't get the opportunity to retain those sentimental things. They get the cash
Got
value,
it. Got
which
it.
could be good or bad.
Mhm.
But again, if you're making these decisions about your own belongings, that's up to you to decide. You have the right to decide
Mhm.
as long as you put it in your will and make it clear and make sure that the executor that you've chosen to execute your will is in complete understanding of what you want, right?
Mhm.
And that they understand what that will means and what they're supposed to do,
Okay.
right? If you take nothing else from this entire webinar, please make a will, make it clear.
Mhm.
If that means you have to add 50 sheets of an addendum with each individual item, then do it. That doesn't mean you have to do that, but please make a will and make it clear. Um, there are other ways that people distribute stuff among families. They draw straws, they roll dice, they go in sorting order. So, oldest son gets to choose first and second son gets to choose second, and they go down
That's
the
how a
list.
lot of my family has done
Yeah.
it.
And
Mhm.
and does it work? I mean, in your experience, has it
Yeah,
gone okay?
for the most part, for
Yeah.
the most part, yeah. I mean, but again, like, I think it's according to the family.
I do. I think it's according to the family and sometimes according to the individuals in the family.
Mhm. Yeah.
But if you've made that decision before you're gone, then
Mhm.
there's, you've made your wish clear. And I
Mhm.
think that's kind of the more important thing is they don't have to agree with what they get
Mhm.
necessarily, but they do have to agree with the method that you've chosen to make sure that that's
Yes. Yeah.
right. They can
Mhm.
respect those wishes. Um, the last one that I will mention here is people who pass without a will or without any wishes expressed, right?
Mhm.
That is maybe to my chagrin, but it really is a valid way of distributing your assets, of distributing your belongings. Um, Maybe you don't feel that you're in a position where you can make good decisions about who gets what. Maybe you're in a
Yeah.
position where you don't know what to do, and you say, "I choose. I'm making a choice, a conscious choice, to let the state of West Virginia or whatever state you're in
Yeah.
decide for me."
Yeah.
That's okay. It really is okay. Um, it's not the coward's way out. It's saying I can't make the best decisions and recognizing that I can't make the best decisions and I don't know what
Mhm.
the best decision is, and letting
Mhm.
the system as it is make those decisions for you. Okay. I think especially if you make this a conscious decision and share that information and communicate that, that is a completely valid decision to make. Right.
Mhm. Agreed.
So the next couple of slides are really just kind of like to-do lists,
Okay.
we'll say. So things that you can do to start getting the process going. Now that we've kind of talked about all the facts, but if you are the owner of the property, so there are worksheets that I can provide and that you can find online even to help you decide what your priorities are. What does fairness look like to you? Worksheets
Mhm.
that can help you list the items that you own and why they're important and where they came from and all of that sort of fun stuff.
Mhm.
I will say that it is important to get your legal documents in order, get a will.
Yes.
There are lots of resources that can help you with that. Tabitha can put you in touch with them. Bringing Back the Village has resources. There's West Virginia Senior Legal Aid. There's lots of resources out there. And communicate your wishes with other people. So once you started making these decisions, or even as you start making your decisions, if you want some help, communicate with other people about what's going on, right? They need to know what's going on so that they can understand your thought process, so that they can make your wishes come true, essentially. If it's appropriate at this point, if you want to start giving things away to people, you're welcome to do that before you pass. Now, I will say things of high monetary value and cash gifts, you do need to talk to a financial planner and a lawyer to make sure you're on the right side of things tax wise and all of that. But as far as, the trinkets in your home and the personal belongings, there should be no problem with. Go ahead and start giving those away if you want, and start telling the stories behind those items so that those who are inheriting them understand what the meaning is.
Yeah, it's not quite the same to give a big wad of cash over and tell the memories. There's legal rules
There
around
are legal
that.
rules. So yes, if you are handing over cash, asset, like valuable assets, anything like that, you absolutely need to talk to a professional before you do that. It's okay to hand over the Tupperware.
Yes. Yes.
Now, if you're the child of someone with a property, or if you're, a friend or a family member of someone who's kind of dealing with these, it's okay to start bringing up that topic with somebody, right? Start to have that conversation. Start to tell them, here's the things you need to think about. Talk to them about their possessions. Understand some of the memories that come along with those possessions, because it's really important. Again, once that person's gone, those memories disappear with them unless they passed them on to somebody else. You can help manage the conflicts between family members, especially if you're not necessarily involved. If you're not a person that's anticipating receiving anything, then you're probably in a pretty neutral position to help the family kind of manage the process. Help that person get their legal documents in order, guide them towards the legal aid that they might need, guide them towards the financial planners that they might need, take them to the law office if they need a ride. And one thing I'll tell everybody, it's never, ever too early to start making these decisions for yourself.
Correct.
Right. I'm fairly young-ish. It is not too early for me to start making these decisions, because no one knows what happens tomorrow. No one knows what happens next week. And again, we're eating the elephant, right? It's a big process. Let's do it a little bit at a time, so that we're not overwhelmed by the decision making at the last minute, and so that our family is not overwhelmed with the decision making after we're gone.
Yes.
Okay.
Love it. You ready?
Sorry, that's a lot of information that we're trying to squeeze in.
Yes.
Yeah. But
did we kind of go over this one?
Yeah, we've gone over the last couple.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's that.
So if someone has questions, they want the worksheets, because I personally think the worksheets are super helpful. What's the easiest way to get those from you?
So the best way to contact me is either get on our website, which is caringtransitionsofkanawhavalley.com, or you can always email me at mjbailey@caringtransitions.com. We also have a Facebook, Caring Transitions of Kanawha Valley, and I'm happy to share any of that information with anybody. I do agree, having the worksheets for me means putting it on a piece of paper, and that helps me organize my thoughts a little better. But some people don't work like that, and I understand that. So,
I'm a worksheet girl.
I'm a worksheet girl myself.
Yeah, I love them, and of course, anyone watching, you can just respond in the Just Us or the Bringing Back the Village messaging also, and we'll get those over to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Melody, because I really think so many people have issues with this. So I'm going to tell my favorite story about you and this particular one, and then we'll end it for the day. But I remember we did this seminar in person at Putnam County Library. And I remember I was there with you, and there was this like super muscular bald guy. He had his arms crossed. He was scowling the whole time, and you could tell he did not want to be there. But as like you kept talking, his arms started relaxing. Like, I can't really get it in the video, but like he started relaxing. He started like really engaging. And, yeah, and we were doing this seminar series at a different, I think we were doing it at a church. This was months later, and he came and he said, I saw this advertising and I wanted to stop by and tell you in person. The only reason I came to that seminar that you did with Melody was my wife made me. And I
Hmm.
was so mad. I did not want to be there. And he was like, and it really got me thinking about my legacy. What am I leaving behind? And he said, I went home and cried like a baby because I realized I had not left a legacy for my children to let them know how much I love them. And since that seminar that he went to with you, he told me every single night before he went to bed, he wrote a letter to his kids. And he was like, I hope they get thousands and thousands of letters out of this. But if they only get 30 or 50, they're now going to know how much they meant to me.
Exactly. I love that. And I do. I think it's just so important to share that stuff while we can.
Mm-hmm.
That's my soapbox is share those memories, share that love, share those emotions, share your thoughts while you can.
Mm-hmm.
There will come a point where you can't. And to your kids and to your friends and your family, that stuff is more valuable than anything.
Yeah, it is. It's
Thank
the
you for sharing that with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again. We're going to let everyone go as usual. We went over time. I always seem to go over time. So, thank you so much, Melody. And for everyone watching, again, we're going to beg you talk to someone, share what you learned today, and maybe it's time for you to have a little bit of a softer type of conversation with your family. So, all right, Melody, thank you so
Yeah.
much. Have a
See you
good
soon.
day.
Bye bye.
Bye.